His father ruled Iran with an iron fist for 37 years. He ran the country's most feared paramilitary networks from the shadows for decades. And now, in the middle of a war that killed his father, his wife, his son, and his mother, he has just become the most powerful man in Iran. Meet Mojtaba Khamenei, Iran's new supreme leader. And here is the question every military strategist, every intelligence analyst, and every oil trader on Earth is asking right now. Does this man make the war shorter, or does he make it catastrophically worse? In the next 12 minutes, we are going to break down every single way Mojtaba Khamenei could change this war, from the Strait of Hormuz to Iran's nuclear program to the sleeper proxy networks the US hasn't even hit yet. Let's start with who this man actually is, because almost nobody in the West has ever seen his face. For most of his life, Mojtaba Khamenei was a ghost. No press conferences, no public speeches, almost no photographs. While the world watched his father wave from podiums and issue fatwas on television, Mojtaba moved silently through the corridors of power, building a network that rivals anything his father had. He was born in 1969 in the holy city of Mashhad, the same year Richard Nixon was inaugurated as US president. He was just 10 years old when his father helped overthrow the Shah and establish the Islamic Republic in 1979. At 18, he joined the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, not as an officer cadet, as a soldier. He served in the Habib Battalion during the final bloody years of the Iran-Iraq War, fighting alongside men who would later become generals, intelligence chiefs, and commanders of Iran's most lethal forces. Those connections, he kept every single one. After the war, he became a cleric. He studied under Ayatollah Taqi Mesbah Yazdi, one of the most hardline, ultra-conservative theologians in all of Iran, a man who believed democracy was incompatible with Islam, a man who believed Iran must never compromise with the West. That is the ideological foundation Mojtaba Khamenei was built on. By 2009, Mojtaba had taken control of the Basij, the paramilitary volunteer force responsible for crushing internal dissent. When Iranian protesters flooded Iranian streets after the disputed election that year, it was Mojtaba's Basij that cracked down on them. He was also accused of rigging the 2005 election to install hardline President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the same man who would later accuse Mojtaba of embezzling from the state treasury. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned him in 2019 for running covert operations, financing Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Iraqi militias, all while holding zero official government title. In plain terms, Mojtaba Khamenei has been running the Islamic Republic from behind a curtain for 20 years. And now, the curtain is gone. February 28, 2026, U.S. and Israeli jets hit Tehran. Ali Khamenei, supreme leader for 37 years, is killed instantly. In the same strike, his wife, his mother, his sister, one of his sons, and Mojtaba himself reportedly wounded, his location still unknown. No verified video of him has appeared since the war began. But here is what happened next, and this is critical. The IRGC didn't wait for grief. They didn't wait for the constitutional process to run its course. Within days of Ali Khamenei's death, IRGC commanders were making direct phone calls and in-person visits to members of the Assembly of Experts, the 88-member clerical body that was supposed to choose the next leader. The atmosphere in that online meeting was described as unnatural. Those who argued against Mojtaba were given limited time to speak. Discussion was cut off, and a vote was held. 8 members threatened to boycott a second session. The Assembly of Experts office in Qom was bombed by the US and Israel after the votes were cast, but before they were counted. On March 8, 2026, just 8 days after his father's death, Mojtaba Khamenei was declared Iran's third supreme leader. What you just witnessed wasn't just a succession, it was the IRGC formally seizing control of the Islamic Republic, using Mojtaba as the face, while running the machine from below. Let's talk about the weapon that isn't a missile. It isn't a nuclear bomb. It isn't a ballistic missile buried in the Alborz Mountains. It's a 21-mile-wide stretch of water between Iran and Oman, and Mojtaba Khamenei just told the world it stays closed. The Strait of Hormuz. Every single day before this war, roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flowed through that strait, about 21 million barrels per day. Saudi oil, Iraqi oil, Kuwaiti oil, UAE oil. If you have a car, a gas stove, or plastic in your home, some of it came through there. Since the war began, oil has already hit $120 a barrel, its highest price since 2022. The International Energy Agency has released 400 million barrels from strategic reserves, the largest emergency intervention in the agency's history, just to keep global supply from collapsing. And in his very first statement as Supreme Leader, he didn't just keep the closure in place. He named the strait his most powerful economic weapon, a pressure lever designed to make the US and its allies feel the war in their wallets, not just on a battlefield 7,000 miles away. Here's why that matters. Every month the strait stays closed, global inflation rises. Every month oil stays above $100, political pressure builds in Washington and in European capitals. Every month the war drags on, the economic cost to the West compounds. That's Iran's strategy under Mojtaba. Not to win militarily, to make the war so economically painful that the US blinks first. Now, here is the scenario that is keeping nuclear analysts awake at night. His father, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, issued a religious fatwa, a formal Islamic prohibition against nuclear weapons. Iran's official position for decades was that building a nuclear bomb was un-Islamic. Mojtaba Khamenei doesn't share that view. Multiple American analyses have assessed that Mojtaba Khamenei is a supporter of Iran obtaining nuclear weapons, in direct opposition to his father's fatwa. Think about the logic from his perspective. His father was killed by a US-Israeli airstrike. His wife was killed. His mother was killed. His son was killed. And Iran's nuclear and missile facilities have been systematically destroyed in the opening weeks of this war. What lesson do you take from that? If you had a nuclear weapon, they couldn't do this to you. North Korea wasn't bombed. Pakistan wasn't bombed. The one insurance policy the US and Israel cannot neutralize is a nuclear deterrent. Now, Iran's known nuclear infrastructure has been heavily degraded by US strikes, but intelligence agencies long suspect Iran maintains undisclosed, deeply buried enrichment sites. Whether those survived the opening campaign is an open question, and a terrifying one. The bottom line, under Mojtaba Khamenei, the ideological brake on Iran's nuclear ambitions has been removed. What his father believed was forbidden, his son may see as a survival necessity. Here's something that gets lost in coverage of Iranian airstrikes and bunker busters. Iran doesn't only fight with its own military, it fights through a network of armed proxy groups spread across 6 countries, a distributed war machine that took 40 years to build and cannot be destroyed by bombing Tehran. Mojtaba Khamenei didn't inherit this network, he helped build it. The US Treasury sanctioned him specifically for financing and directing Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and armed militias in Iraq. These weren't his father's relationships passed down to him. These were his personal operational ties, developed over decades through the IRGC's Quds Force. In his very first statement, Mojtaba named the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon specifically, calling them Iran's best friends and describing them as an inseparable part of the values of the Islamic Revolution. The Houthis are still firing. Iraqi militia groups have signaled they want to help. And in that same statement, Mojtaba said Iranian officials are actively studying the opening of new fronts in areas where, in his own words, the enemy has little experience and is highly vulnerable. New fronts. That phrase should be circled in red by every military planner in the Pentagon. What those fronts are, nobody outside Tehran knows right now. But with a man who has spent his career managing covert proxy operations, now formally in charge, the options are broader and darker than they were under his father. But here is the problem Mojtaba Khamenei wakes up to every single morning. He is not popular with ordinary Iranians. When anti-government protesters filled Iranian streets in 2009, one of their chants was specifically directed at him. They knew, even then, that he was positioned to take power. They chanted, "Wish you death, Mojtaba, so you would never be the next leader." That was 2009. Since then, Iran has seen massive protest waves in 2019, 2022, and again in January 2026, weeks before this war even started. The Iranian economy has been crushed by sanctions. Inflation is rampant. A major state bank was dissolved after it went bankrupt, handing out loans to insider cronies. Cronies, analysts link directly to Mojtaba's financial network. Mojtaba himself has quietly built a property empire worth hundreds of millions, real estate from the Middle East to Europe, while millions of ordinary Iranians can barely afford basic goods. His appointment as Supreme Leader deepened those divisions. His selection was effectively a dynastic succession, exactly the kind of monarchical power transfer the 1979 revolution was supposed to abolish. Some analysts compared it directly to the Pahlavi Shah, the monarchy the revolution overthrew. Even inside the regime, not everyone was on board. Ali Larijani, one of Iran's most powerful political figures, gave a notably lukewarm endorsement. 8 Assembly of Experts members threatened to boycott the vote. So, Mojtaba is fighting an external war against the US and Israel, and he's one bad economic shock or one leaked photo of his European property portfolio away from an internal uprising that could threaten the regime itself. Every analyst studying this war right now is trying to answer one question: which way does Mojtaba take Iran? Because there are really only 3 paths forward. Path 1: escalation. Mojtaba leans into his IRGC roots. He doubles down on the proxy network, activates new fronts, keeps the strait closed, and accelerates any surviving nuclear program. He frames the war as an existential battle for the Islamic Revolution, positioning himself as the avenger of his father, his wife, his son. This path is the one his first statement pointed toward. It also risks complete economic collapse of Iran and potential regime change from within. Path 2: the frozen conflict. Neither side wins. The US achieves its stated goals of destroying nuclear and missile infrastructure, but cannot achieve the regime change it stops short of admitting it wants. Iran continues low-level proxy attacks and keeps enough Hormuz disruption to maintain leverage. A frozen conflict, like Korea or like the original Iran-Iraq war stalemate, that grinds on for years. This is actually the most historically likely outcome. Path 3: the deal. Here is the counterintuitive scenario. Mojtaba, precisely because he controls the IRGC and has absolute legitimacy with the hardline base, is actually the only person who could sell Iran a compromise without being called a traitor. As heir to the family name, he can frame any deal as a strategic decision, not a humiliation. His father could never have done this. Mojtaba theoretically can. The problem? There's zero signal from his first statement that this is where he's heading. Iran International described that statement as containing no off-ramp, no promise of reform, and no acceptable outcome for a ceasefire. What we do know from the IRGC commander who told Iranian state television that Iran's forces can maintain significant attacks for at least 6 months is that the Islamic Republic is not planning to fold next week. We need to end on the one thing nobody can answer. Mojtaba Khamenei has not been seen in public since becoming supreme leader. His first official statement was not delivered in person. It was read aloud by a news anchor on state television while a still photograph of him was displayed on screen. No audio, no video, no proof of life beyond official Iranian government claims. Iranian state media has reported he was wounded in the same strike that killed his father. Multiple intelligence sources have suggested the injuries may be severe. One report raised the possibility that he may be in a coma. If that's true, and it is unverified, then the man formerly titled Supreme Leader of Iran may not actually be running anything. What that would mean is the IRGC, Iran's most hardline, most powerful, and least diplomatically inclined institution, is making all the decisions while using Mojtaba's name and title as a legitimizing shield. A supreme leader who is a figurehead, a military with no political leash, nuclear ambitions with no theological restraint. One intelligence analyst put it simply: the era of Ali Khamenei was predictable. He was calculating. He understood limits. Whatever comes next, whether it's Mojtaba in recovery, or Mojtaba fully in command, or Mojtaba as a puppet for generals who answer to no one, is something the world has not seen before. And that uncertainty, more than any missile, more than any nuclear site, more than any oil price, is the most dangerous thing in the Middle East right now. If you want to understand what happens next in this war, watch Mojtaba's first public appearance. Watch whether he appears on camera. Watch whether his voice is steady, because in that moment, you will know whether Iran still has a leader or whether the generals have already taken over. Subscribe for breakdowns of this war, and drop in the comments, do you think Mojtaba escalates or cuts a deal? Let us know below.